My name is Graham Henderson. I'm the president of Music Canada. We're the trade and advocacy organization that represents major labels in Canada, and we're a national group affiliate of the IFPI. Along with the International Association of Entertainment Lawyers, we're pleased to welcome you here today to bring a new perspective to an issue that many of us have no doubt been discussing and working to solve for many years, the value gap. And our friends at the IAEL happen to be releasing a new book today, Finding Value in the Gap, immediately following this event, and I encourage everyone who's here to join us in the main room on the third floor. Now, there are variations across the industry as to the precise definition of the value gap, but we at Music Canada define it as, and I quote, the significant disparity between the value of creative content that is accessed and enjoyed by consumers and the revenues that are returned to the people and businesses who create it. Last year, we at Music Canada produced our own report. It was a first of its kind at the time on the value gap, examining the origins and effects. We devised a made-in-Canada approach to addressing the problem in our country. And we have copies here at the front. You probably saw them when you came in. They're in French and in English. We're a bilingual country. I'm not. And I hope you will, I know Eric looks at me, he thinks, you could do better, Graham. And he's right. But the foundation of the value gap lies in the misapplication of outdated safe harbor provisions, laws that allies and advocates in the US and the EU, like Lodovico, who is with us here today from the IFPI, we're working diligently to correct this. In addition to recommending that the Canadian government examine the effects of safe harbor laws on Canadian creators, our report identifies other provisions within the Canadian Copyright Act that prevent music creators from receiving fair market value for their work, and this exacerbates the effect of the value gap. But the reason we organized this event today is to draw attention to a phenomenon that seems to be lighting a fire under Canadian policymakers to act on behalf of creators. And we want to highlight the work of one incredible artist, one incredible advocate at the forefront of this movement. The phenomenon I'm speaking of is that more and more artists are speaking up, often directly to politicians and other decision makers, about their reality and what those in positions of power, and all of us for that matter, can do to make sure that full-time creativity, professional creativity, doesn't cease to exist. Artist advocacy carries a special power. It offers a window into the lives of people whom the value gap affects the most, those with the ability to make change happen. Now, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'll briefly describe the format of the event. Following our keynote, we will have a 30-minute panel discussion with global leaders in the push to address the value gap, then hopefully a 10-minute Q&A period where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. But now the part I'm most excited about. Over the last 2 years, Miranda Mulholland has emerged as a powerful voice in the artist advocacy community, and I would argue that she cemented her place as Canada's leading artist advocate. Her recent advocacy work includes 2 keynotes for political decision makers at the prestigious Economic Club of Canada, a speech to government and industry leaders during NAFTA negotiations in Washington. She spoke at the inaugural Artist Rights Summit in Athens, Georgia, rallying an army of fellow musicians to support her letters to the Canadian government, as well as a high-profile keynote last month to open Canadian Music Week in Toronto. Miranda has performed on over 50 records. She's classically trained. She has a degree in music. She performs for film and television. She owns a boutique record label. She's founded a music festival, which is now in its second year. And one of the things that we have found in working with Amanda is this little piece of advice that I will pass on to you all. Those of you who wish to involve artists in your advocacy, it makes a difference if you ask an artist to ask an artist. The answer can be very different. If we go to artists as labels, if we go to artists as managers, the answer could be very different from the answer that an artist might get from another artist. So with that said, I'm going to welcome Miranda Mulholland to the stage.
Thanks very much, Graham. Welcome everyone to Midem. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry we're not up on the roof, but this is actually better for my sunscreen situation. So I hope you'll all don't mind. It's a pleasure to be here. I can meet all of you and practice my French and enjoy some croissants. But it's especially great to be here today, and I'll tell you why. Because we're at an amazing juncture in history. All the negative consequences of the technological disruptions of the past 20 years are finally being acknowledged. It's been acknowledged that we were the canaries down the mine. Even in Silicon Valley, they're scrambling to make lame efforts to fix things or pretend that they never happened. So what happened? Well, we all know. I'm sure that no one in here needs a spoiler alert on this, because I can almost guarantee that every single one of us has felt the effect of the digital revolution. It changed all of our lives, and it reached every level of our ecosystem. Our community is made up of businesses, small, independent artists like me, to large, major labels, publishers, law firms, and everything in between that makes our industry function. But we got to work after the digital revolution, and we adapted. Now, it's been a year and a half since I first addressed the Economic Club of Canada that Graham referenced. And when I described what life was like for 99% of artists trying to make a living wage, there was audible gasps in the room. And what I was describing was the value gap. So Graham defined it, and I'm going to repeat it because it's important. It's the significant disparity between the value of creative content that's accessed and enjoyed by consumers and the revenues that are returned to the people and the businesses that create it. So what does that really mean? This means that the 1% have almost all of it, and the 99% have what's left. But now it's been recognized. IFPI stated in their recent study that the value gap is currently the biggest policy challenge facing the music industry. And the European Commission has now acknowledged that the market isn't functioning properly and that they've identified and accepted the problem as an unintended value gap and agreed that legal clarification is necessary. And our own Minister of Culture in Canada, Melanie Joly, has concluded that the benefits of the digital economy have not been shared equally. Too many creators, journalists, artists have been left behind, and there needs to be a better balance. Now imagine if governments had realized that in 2003. Where would we all be now? I've had the opportunity to speak to policymakers both in Canada and the US, and this is making me the most optimistic, the most hopeful that how our industry and how our voices can make a difference. Everyone has caught up with the fact that we got the merde. Thank you for laughing. Everyone in this room knows that tech is important. We have adapted. We've learned best practices for MySpace, and I'm so glad I put so much time into my MySpace page. Pandora, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, and so on. And guess what? They've also learned from us. Now, I love tech. So many amazing things have happened because of the digital revolution. I learned how to install a CD player on my '98 Corolla, and then I told my dad how to do it. I can't believe how far games have come since playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego on my Commodore 64. And touring, as a touring musician, it's so much easier now with Google Maps. And just the other day, I met a couple who'd met on Instagram by liking each other's photos, and now they're married. And now we know that Grimes and Elon Musk met on Twitter. So thank goodness for the digital revolution. But any new invention does have its consequences. For instance, when the compass was invented and came into regular use, it was regarded as transformative. It allowed explorers to encounter new lands and for merchants to safely and quickly transport their goods, but it also allowed pirates to flourish. Does this sound familiar? Not only pirates, but government-sanctioned pirates, privateers. Modern safe harbors do exactly this. The legal framework within which we are operating and trying to innovate was concocted in the 1990s. This is when I wore Varney France hypercolor neon t-shirts. And governments haven't meaningfully adapted their laws since then. But I should have kept those Varney France t-shirts because they're coming back. But the policies have left us far behind. But it feels as if we've turned a corner. Or does it? This is great. This is a great article by Damon Krakowski writing for Pitchfork, and he writes, Spotify now claims 140 million active users, 70 million of whom are paid subscribers, and the total consumption of audio streams in the US jumped by an estimated 50% last year. But while it's clear that some are earning significant paychecks from streaming, as a result, most musicians are not. And the basic reason is simple. According to the data trackers at BuzzAngle Music, more than 99% of audio streaming is of the top 10% most streamed tracks, which means that less than 1% of streams account for all other music. Now, I find this incredible. I'm going to repeat it because I find this absolutely incredible, coming from a community of people who really care about the music that they create. 99% of audio streaming is of the top 10% most streamed tracks. So 1% of streams is all other music. That is insane to me. And that's not the 1% that I wanted to be in. But the more nuanced reason is that we're still subsidizing the billionaires. And here's a Canadian example. The radio royalty exemption is an industry cross-subsidy given to every commercial radio station in Canada, exempting them from paying more than $100 in royalties to artists and record labels on their first $1.25 million in advertising revenue. And the exemption was introduced as a political compromise in 1997 amendments to the Copyright Act, but it's outdated now and unjustified if it ever was. So the landscape has changed significantly. And now, most of these stations have been acquired by big media companies, but the subsidies still apply. And so that means that your favorite musicians and the bands that you signed and represent and the musicians that you manage are actually subsidizing giant media companies. And then let's look at the biggest music service in the world, which is YouTube. 82% of YouTube users use it for music. And while YouTube is benefiting from safe harbors put in place when they were a startup that claimed they needed them because they were a passive vehicle for user-uploaded content, but 80% of YouTube watch time is recommended. Google Brass has said that. So this means that YouTube actively directs consumers, and that doesn't seem passive to me. So we've caught up. The industry has caught up. We're trying to adapt, but the laws are not adapting. So where do we go from here? Songwriters are skilled storytellers, and we can get a point across in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Music industry members, labels, managers, agents, you all have incredible experience in amplifying these voices. And I'd like to draw attention and a welcome to the IAEL, our dear supporters, for your help and sponsorship on this, because lawyers also have a job to do. They have an incredible ability to be connectors, to introduce, to start discussions, to empower and activate your clients. And you'll find on your table, I've put together an infographic of things that we all in this industry, we're an ecosystem, things that we all can do. And thanks so much to Susan Abramovich for a lovely consultation about what lawyers can do, because I just feel you guys have superpowers of connectivity. All of us need to stay updated on all the ways that musicians can be compensated. And this includes royalty opportunities, the differences between the streaming platforms and how fans consume music. You can relay this to your clients and musicians that you work with and direct them to places that they can find it. I've left you one website on the infographic, but there are so many different ones out there, and I definitely urge you to be skeptical and check many sources, but definitely know where to find this information. Advocate. Use your platform to advocate for change for creators. I would say write a book, but the IAEL did. They did. So thank you. Amazing. Create effort. Yes. And make sure everybody heads over to the main room just after this for their presentation. Create opportunities for others to speak, such as this, and speak up yourself. And this will help everyone, including you. We are all highly effective advocates. No one knows about our experiences as well as we do. And sometimes making change is as easy as being very honest about how things actually are. The government is finally listening to us, and we have to act with urgency. In Europe, there's a very important vote being held in a few weeks, and their stance on safe harbors could set a precedent for the rest of the world. Right now, in Canada, they were supposed to start the reform of the Copyright Act in November, and it's 6 months late. At this glacial pace, the hearings will not conclude in time for any meaningful reform before the next election. And if that happens, who knows? You know, we could be looking at reform in 2020 or 2022, but that's 3 album cycles for someone like me. And in this YouTube 24-hour news cycle, that's whole careers. People are losing careers because of this. If we don't speak up, pieces of important legislation will be drafted without consent. I've been thinking a lot about consent lately. Consent in all kinds of different contexts, and I think many of us have. Now, the definition of consent is permission for something to happen. And there's also informed consent, which is permission granted with full knowledge of the consequences. Well, none of us gave our full knowledge, our informed consent about what was going to happen to our work, our business, and our industry 20 years ago. But we do have the ability to inform policies moving forward. We have the initiative now, and they're listening. If you're interested in any more ideas, you can visit my advocacy page, which is on this pamphlet. There's a Canadian website called Focus on Creators, and we've been really trying to unite the voices of people who are creating this content and advocating for change. And you can email me at any time and reach out. My email is miranda@roaringgirlrecords.com. My logo is on the, I'm very, very chuffed because my logo is on the big photo screen down there with the Midem logo and the Music Canada logo. A dear friend of mine designed it for me, and Kate Domina is the artist. She's a fantastic artist. I have to give props to the creators. But I feel very, Midem logo's great, Music Canada logo, but I think I win this round, fellas. I'd like to close with this. I had lunch last year with some government officials during Canadian Music Week, and a bunch of artists were at the table as well, and we all chatted and sort of shared experiences. And we talked about the value gap and the state of artists and what it's like now earning a living, wearing so many hats and really trying to feed our families. One of the policymakers said, well, you're just asking us to turn back the clock. And I said it then, and I'm going to say it again now. We're not asking the government to turn the clock back. We're asking them to catch up. We're asking them to turn the clock forward. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda. I'd now like to invite our panelists to the stage, and I'll briefly introduce them as they're gathering, so please come up. Anne-Marie Pecoraro is a renowned French attorney who specializes in TMT, IP, and entertainment law. She's built a strong expertise in counsel, negotiation, and litigation in the music and movie industries, and is an international audiovisual arbitrator with the IFTA. My friend Lodovico Benvenuti is the director of IFPI's European office in Brazil. And of course, as you know, he represents the interests of record labels into European institutions and works closely with the national groups in the EU member states. Moderating our panel is Jeff Liebenson, who is the president of the International Association of Entertainment Lawyers and a principal of Levinson Law in New York City. Jeff concentrates his practice in the convergence of music and technology. He negotiates digital licensing agreements and consults on IP issues relating to the digital environment. So welcome, Jeff, and the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you, Miranda, for that inspiring keynote. Welcome, everybody, to this beautiful venue. Sorry we're not up on the roof, but I think we're better protected from the elements. I want to just briefly talk about the IAEL. I've been very fortunate to be president of this organization now for several years. The IAEL is an organization of over 300 entertainment lawyers from around the world. And the more our industry develops, the more our clients' interests are multinational and cross borders, the more vital it is for us all to have access to trusted colleagues and advisors in other countries. If something comes up in Brazil, if it comes up in Europe, if it comes up in any market, we always have colleagues we can reach out to that we've met here at Midem and other functions, and it's really invaluable in performing our service to our clients. I think it's ironic. I've known Graham Henderson for over 20 years, and we originally met through the negotiation of record contracts. Graham was an ardent supporter of his clients, recording artists that, in this case, were assigned to BMG, and I was negotiating for BMG. So we were on opposite sides of the deals, and Graham is a vigorous advocate for whoever he is representing. And when it was artists, it was very passionate for Graham. And I was confronting all sorts of arguments and defending my company in a way I never had to defend it with anyone else I negotiated with. And I remember those epic discussions. So it's a little ironic. I now no longer work at a record label. I now represent different clients, rights holders, and digital distributors. Graham is not battling against the record label. He represents the record labels. And a further irony, today, to best represent the record labels, he is supporting artists' rights. So I think it's fascinating how we're going to talk about the value gap, but I think there's also a value chain. We're all interrelated. Everyone's position in the industry, we all, to the extent, we all have our own positions, but everyone's well-being is interconnected. And I think that as things go on, we play different roles and we see things from different sides, and I think that's a big part of addressing some of the challenges we have today. So while you're enjoying your lunch, we're going to have a panel discussion here, and then we're going to go down and talk about our new book from the IAEL, Finding the Value and the Gap, which we're releasing today. Every year we have a book, and our members from around the world contribute. We're really proud. We have a series of the books available, so you can see the breadth of topics that we've been addressing over the years. And so let's start our panel. And first, Lodovico and Anne-Marie, I'd just like to ask for your reaction to the comments that Miranda made.
Well, I think I'm here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm here because in Brussels, this huge issue, which is the value gap, is addressed in this very moment. By the way, in sunny Brussels, while in Cannes here we are not as lucky as we would expect to be. And I think that what is the value gap in the campaign in Brussels is very much what you described. And what you described is the expression of not only the value gap, but the value chain, which is a magic word that we keep insisting on. Music community, value chain, all together to try to change the situation. It's amazing. It's already a victory that something that 3 years ago would have been impossible to think about is now at the core of the discussion in a big market as the European Union. So we got to the point in which finally, we have been saying it for quite a while, but finally the general public understands that there is something to be fixed, that rules that have been created in Europe now 18 years ago are not fit for purpose. They were justified at that time because they had been created in order to prepare the digital revolution and to address purely passive operators, and it has been misused by services such as, I'm not going to quote them, such as YouTube, to create a business model. So I think that really, and it's a big alliance between all the actors of the music community in order to bring the resources back to the creation. The Value Gap campaign has been started with artists, 1,300 artists calling to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, for a solution to the value gap. This then was then followed by a proposal from the European Commission. This proposal said very simply that these platforms communicate to the public and therefore are not benefiting of the safe harbor. We are now in the climax of the discussion because this discussion is now in the Parliament and discussed among member states. And I think that everybody along this value chain should really look at what happens in Brussels because this is a very key moment. If we manage to do it and to achieve this objective in Brussels, this will have, I'm sure, a very positive effect around the globe.
I'd like to follow up on one of the comments you made about that the platforms are communicating to the public. And, it's a legal concept. Can you explain what it is? No, that's fine. But just explain a little bit what the evolution is in thinking about whether the platforms are communicating and what the significance of that is.
Well, actually, there were two pillars in the Commission proposal. One is this copyright-based concept of communication to the public, and the second one is whether these platforms can enjoy the safe harbor. These two pillars were relevant because in each member state in Europe, you had situations in which they were found not enjoying the safe harbor, but then the judges would say, yes, but they do not communicate to the public, so they would escape through the copyright rules, or the other way around, which is the most classical way of seeing it, that they would be found to communicate to the public, but not enjoying the safe harbor. So it was very important to clarify both things. that they are putting in place a copyright relevant act so that they communicate to the public, which is regulated in international treaties and in the Copyright Directive, Article 3. I'm not going to get technical. And secondly, that since they do communicate to the public, they are also not able to enjoy the safe harbor, which is regulated in the e-commerce directive and in the DMCA in the US and many other legislation around the world. So I hope this answers your question.
It certainly does. Anne-Marie, I'd like to ask for your reaction.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. First, I'm very impressed by Miranda's advocacy and work as it builds strong ground for a real campaign, coordinated campaign. And I will revert to this. And then also, it's important to underline that we have to watch very carefully on the copyright directive that you just explained us, that it can bring some progress, even if it's not perfect. But our country, France, has developed strong lobbying in Brussels in favor of those progress. I'm lucky to have experience in structuring campaigns and organizing campaigns and advocacy. And the first thing is that the campaign needs to be global, because the group you're working, you're supposed to work against are global, and also because through the world a lot of people have not all the same interests. For instance, of course, producers and artists don't still have the same interests, but they have a lot of joint interests, and this is the way to build a coalition, to see only what you have in common and not all your differences. And when you watch in the other territories, then I can understand what happens in Canada, where the rules and the regulations, you're not happy with the regulations, but you have strong capabilities to build advocacy. And in our countries, we have interesting texts, because the EU is as it is, and in the EU you have a very particular country. For instance, in France you also have strong regulations which could appear as over-regulated sometimes, but also sources of excellent regulations maybe for other territories. So organizing is being global, is being very coordinated with strong coalitions, is building communication campaign. Why not naming and shaming the people we work against? And one main thing is to have a very high level of ambitious goals. If you're campaigning, this is not to obtain a little. You have to show to the world with your voice that what you want is a real fair wage compensation and fair wage and fees. Why not with the minimum you can try to ask for? Naming and shaming means that you analyze a scheme as you did in your report, and the report will stay on the internet and will be understood worldwide. But when you analyze the scheme, you can show also that the groups with the platforms, those groups are still in the minimum standards and minimum social binding. And then you can show that the same people, they pay the less that they can as soon as they have the choice. And also, as soon as they have the choice, they pay as little as they can for tax. And the same people, they earn their money with sometime tax optimization and saving money, paying less the artists and producers. And this is all a global scheme that you can also reveal by your work. So my first comment was about building a global and structured and organized campaign. And my second comment is with respect to public affairs and directive, that it's also a very important part of the job, to work maybe with some groups, maybe with the consumers also, that you try to raise their awareness, because it's not against the consumers, but to show also they can lose something if they don't join the movement. And public affairs, this is it's necessary to watch very carefully the evolution of the text, especially in the EU, and to not hesitate to coordinate legal actions. And with the new text, we will be able to stop some exploitations if we enforce the new text. Maybe some artists will be able to withdraw from some platforms when they are not paid enough. And in some of our countries, you have strong legal means such as site blocking, disindexing, a lot of work all over the world to really enforce the text. So all this is also a protest, the same process from the public affairs, the watch, the legal actions, and taking back the exclusivity of the rights and the power of on your works.
I think a really key part is this work? Yes. Basically taking a coordinated, multifaceted approach, not just legislatively, but putting pressure on platforms in various ways to try to improve the results that we get from them. Lodovico, can you update us where we are now in Brussels?
So in Brussels, in Brussels is indeed an example. We hope it's an example of this multifaceted approach, in the sense that besides the traditional lobbying exercise and coordination with all the right holders, because we have to take in consideration that while the music sector and the music community has been on the lead, the initiator of this campaign in Europe, now we needed to have the support of all the other right holders. So besides the normal work of traditional lobbying, we had to create around us a general support from the cinema industry, from authors, feature artists, any kind of organization along this general value chain of the creative sector has been involved in the campaign. This is obviously difficult but it's challenging, let's say, more than difficult. It's challenging because obviously we are used to come from different perspectives, as you said. But on this very campaign, I think that we managed to understand that this was about the size of the whole cake. And so this was about everybody, so there was a common interest to get to a positive result. Besides this, obviously there has been the key role, as I said before, of the artists, because obviously the policymakers, they do care about businesses, but they do care a lot about artists, because, you know, music is in their lives. And when I go to speak to a commissioner or to a politician, obviously the effect that I produce is much less than if it's an artist, because that artist is able to do something that I'm not able to do, which is touching their souls. So this is the reason why we regularly organize in the European Parliament an event which is called Friends of Music, which is now 30 years old, where we bring famous and less famous artists to perform in the European Parliament. I joined this industry recently, but I find absolutely amazing how successful these events are. And the last one was with Placido Domingo. The one before was with Amy MacDonald, and many other before. We had Bocelli. I don't know. John Blewett is in the room. He can remind me, but I don't know all of them. But it is incredible the impact that artists do in this kind of campaigns.
I'd love to say something about that. One thing that we've really found in Canada, and you don't have to worry if you've never heard of me, because people in Canada have never heard of me either. but one thing that you actually, maybe 50% of you have probably heard my work before. And one of the reasons that the artists getting across to our governments is working is that it's not, I mean, it's wonderful that when Domingo can show up and Paul McCartney will come and sign things and take photos, but the governments believe that those people are okay. And it's the people like me and my friends who are working really hard and have degrees and have committed ourselves to this lifestyle who are having trouble making this work. And so to have artists who are maybe not famous, but are famous adjacent, is probably the most effective tool that you can encourage. Nobody could say that I haven't tried my hardest because, you know, I run a record label and I have a music festival and I've played with bands all over the world and I've played on over 50 records. And yet to still have difficulty paying rent is a real thing. And so the use of artist advocates, and not necessarily the ones that look good in photo ops, is actually the important part, I think. But as you know, as you mentioned, I think this is very important too, is making sure that it's a targeted approach because everybody does have a role to play. We're all so important in this. We are all part of this ecosystem, and activating your artists if you're in the industry and activating your friends. The most powerful thing that has happened to me since I started being very honest about what my lifestyle is like is that other musician friends in my community have been able to say, people who I thought were doing so well, and they've been able to say, it's difficult for me too, this is happening, this is very honest. I texted a friend to come and play my music festival. I said, are you available this weekend? Gave him the dates. This is a Juno Award winner, so our Grammys in Canada. And he texted back and said, no, it's not available. And I thought, oh, that's too bad. He's so wonderful. It'd be great. He'd be a big draw. And then 5 minutes later, he texted me again and said, oh, you mean as a musician? I thought you wanted to rent my Airbnb. So this is a musician who's an award winner, and it's still not okay for him. So again, I do think that all of us have a role to play. Number one, advocacy is fine in a word, but without action, it doesn't mean anything. And number two, that activating artists is definitely a silver bullet.
It's in the last concert with Domingo, we had Domingo himself, but also from 3 young artists from his academia. And actually, to me, the most impactful message was from one of these 3 artists who said, this is Domingo, give me also the same level of opportunities. Because there is this element in the messaging of solidarity between the Domingo likes, or Renee Fleming, I remember her doing a speech in front of some policy officers in Beaux-Arts, saying, I want those who come after me to have the same possibilities that I had. I don't want to be the last one recording. This was the proper sense. And I think that this is a very strong element of solidarity between generations and between level of fame. That's absolutely very important.
You know, the technology is so powerful and the music is so widely available that this should be the greatest time ever for Domingo not to be the last one, for Miranda and so many artists to be able to reach the market in a way they never could before. But we obviously have so many places between artist creation and the ultimate exploitation on the platforms where the revenue doesn't come back. And I think a key part of it is data and registration of data and having clear metadata. You know, they say data is the new oil. And we have people here in the room representing, you know, the rights holders that are also, it used to be you were a rights holder, you dealt with the artist or the songwriter, and now you have to operate your database. The database is essential to managing the rights. And you know, Miranda and Anne-Marie, I'd love to hear if you have any examples of how it's improving and where are we with transparency and with actually having the chain of data actually reach the pocketbook of the artist so that you can pay your rent.
Well, I have to mention two things in several directives. First, I think that in the amendments to the copyright directive, there is a very interesting things about transparency, because when you need to check your royalties and to receive your royalties, accountability reporting is essential. And in the copyright directive, that as some aspect that we can hope we will be able to apply and enforce with effectiveness. We have improvement of compatibility reporting and developed a clause about the transparency, and even an adjustment mechanism if with all the process the remuneration is supposed to be too low. So this is not the final text, but I think that to me the transparency is very important. And in another area which is in movie exploitation, some of the right holders and some collective management organizations have been able to obtain really detailed reporting. And so this is very important. I don't think we could have a fair remuneration without the transparency. And as I'm in the directive, I also wanted Jeff to give another example in audiovisual and motion picture area and television area. An example I like now because it's in another directive, not for music, but with good ideas, which is the AVMS directive for audiovisual media services. And I would give some tips to think about maybe for our business. In the audiovisual, in the AVMS directive, there is some quotas for diversity. The directive will say that even the platforms must respect some quotas with percentage. For us, this is for European work, but this is to ensure diversity and also to ensure their prominence. And so ensuring the prominence of some works, this is something we really have to think about, because you need the consumers to find you on the platforms. So what is the prominence? Maybe the prominence is the way that they will find you through algorithm or through marketing options. And so this is something more advanced in the AVMS, but we could think about this example. The example of the quotas is not so bad, if it's stronger regulation. And also, the right to apply some tax and contributions on the platforms for a fund. Why not imagining some fund for financing some projects for the music area and for young artists? And I would like to know, Miranda, do you think it could be something we could imaginate if we have ambitious goals to imaginate? Why not a minimum remuneration? I mean, if you could say, as long as I'm on YouTube and I don't withdraw and I stay on YouTube, I want a rule with a minimum remuneration.
YouTube is a funny example because there's tech and then there's that tech. And so they don't have to pay the same remuneration as other legitimate platforms because of the safe harbors. I do believe that there should be. Right now, all of the platforms operate on market share. So when my record drops, which is an Americana record, in the same month as Drake, I don't make the same per stream as Drake does, for example. So, and again, the algorithm, that sort of market share algorithm, is problematic for artists who are more, well, the 99% really, everybody who's not in that 1% of the top 10 streamed tracks. The less that you're played, the less likely it is that you will be played. So perhaps quotas could be something that could amend that in a way. I do believe that data, metadata is of the utmost importance as someone I've played on so many records, and it's up to me to fill in my neighboring rights to say I've played on this record. But a lot of times you go into a studio with a band and you play on some songs and then you leave the studio and I'll have to actually find the song online and see if they used my fiddle or singing and see what track it's on and then be able to put it in. It's up to me, which seems a little bit crazy. I had to find out that I played on an Arcade Fire song. I mean, that ended up being a couple of cents. But I had to, come across that myself, and so to have a better, definitely inputting way of metadata. And as a boutique label owner, I'm the one who's filling out the metadata, so I certainly know how detailed you can get. I do want to draw a small attention to the fact that, as legislation is being written, as these things are coming across in prose and words on a page, how important certain words can be for artists. Right now in Canada, we have a definition of sound recording that is defined in a certain way that does allow for the writer of the music to be compensated, but not the performer. So, for example, I played on this TV show. It's a sort of chummy cop show called Republic of Doyle, and it was a huge hit in Canada, and it's been syndicated all around the world. So perhaps at 3 a.m. you may have all seen it at some point in your hotel room. And I played all of the fiddle for that show over 5 seasons. And a lot of that, I think I did maybe 6 sessions to record all of that fiddle. Each season I would do another session and get all of the fiddle that they needed done, and got paid $220, which was my fee. And yet, this show is on all over the world, and my fiddle is being played in your hotel room at 3 a.m., and I don't receive anything because of a very specific wording. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen and transpire in Brussels. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen in my country, Canada, because this is a time when we can get those wordings right, where we can make sure that they are precise and they do cover the things that we need them to cover.
Well said. While we're waiting for Brussels, and it seems like it's increasingly coming soon, we certainly hope so. While that's happening, our book is focusing really on the proactive things that counsel can do with their clients now to try to find ways to close the value gap. I think we're all, in one way or another, part of the same value stream. Please join us at 2:30. We're going to be releasing our book and have a number of contributors addressing some of these issues. Thank you all so much for joining us.